I tested HIV positive in 1997, and the result of that, or the reason behind that, was because we have to go back to 1995 when I had been in a relationship with a girl for 6 years, and I was closeted. I never told anybody that I was gay, and so I come out to all my friends and her friends and our families, and came out, and I moved on from that. But when I did, I'd always known or heard about HIV and AIDS, and that it was higher risk, or it was always associated with the gay community. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this and go be myself, then I have to go get tested. So I found this little clinic downtown, and it was an anonymous clinic run by a black organization. They were very nice people, and so I did. I went and had my so-called periodic HIV test. And from 1995, it was the end of 95 up until September 97, I had tested HIV negative 5 times. Well, in 97, before I tested positive, I had, I was actually seeing this guy, and we had actually got a roommate, and we had an apartment together. And when I asked him, when we moved in together, I'd asked him if he was okay, referring to the STDs and the HIV and all that stuff, and he had told me that he was fine, that everything was cool. So we continued on, but there was this group or circle of friends of ours that would tell me that he had full-blown AIDS, and that I had to get tested, and that he was lying to me. So again, I recall confronting him, and I asked him. I said, I'm hearing some rumors, and I need to know. And so he opens up his wallet and he shows me the test results that showed that he's negative. Well, I didn't pay attention, just like anybody wouldn't pay attention. I went back to these so-called friends of ours, and they said that those test results were old, and that they were outdated. So again, I go back, and while he's sleeping, I checked his wallet, and sure enough, the test results were 4 years old, and they did say negative on them. So that prompted me to go back to the clinic that I always knew, and I told them the story about what I was being told. And I wasn't even sick. There was nothing wrong with me. I just went based on what they told me. And sure enough, I walked in. I spent about 5 days in pure fear and wondering, about this. And I think I even made myself sick. I remember getting a fever, and just from the anxiety of waiting on a test result, when somebody is, the things that they were saying about him being promiscuous, and I even caught him cheating. So with my own eyes, it the whole waiting game is just not a fun thing. So anyways, I go back for my results, and of course I was told that I was HIV positive, and then I was immediately sent to a bigger clinic, and they ran all these other tests, Western blots and viral loads and stuff. And then I was sent up to another county to be entered into a drug study with AZT. I think it was 3TC and DDD or something, DD3 or something like that. It was a study drug called DMP 266. There was 3 separate bottles. So I remember taking the purest form of AZT that they had, and in this study, and I did this study for about 4 long months, and wanting nothing more than just lay down and die because yeah, I think I remember the one drug. It wasn't DD3. It was 3TC and indinavir. It was a protease inhibitor. I think that was the drug that always made me like nauseous and just, I mean, 24 hours a day, I was just a mess. I was miserable. So um, it was about the fourth month, and I was beating myself up like most people do that are told that they're HIV positive. I I packed up a bag or two and just moved to Fort Lauderdale. And so I moved to Fort Lauderdale, and I was there alone. I had no friends, no family. I had to start all over. And there I thought, well, if I'm going to die, I'm going to just be alone. And so I did. For 2 years, I lived in Fort Lauderdale, and I didn't become like a big activist or anything, but I was a part of the awareness programs and the awareness campaigns. I would tell people, about safe sex and, protecting yourself and get tested and all of these things. And I remember a friend of mine that I had met at that time had invited me to he invited me to, it was like one of those pause circles, those pause groups where everybody comes together as a group and they talk about things. And so I went to this group. There was about 20 to 25 people around, and it was somewhat of a circle. And I sat around and I listened, and it was more of a complaint session about the diseases they were getting from their drugs, their diarrhea, and all of these complications. I mean, there were people that were having nerve problems and um, swollen stomachs and just all of these what they call side effects. These were actual diseases. I mean, people were taking medications for what their ARVs or their antiretroviral drugs were giving them. So I didn't find anything positive about that particular group. So I made a vow to never go back to them and just go on and live neutral on my own with it and live out my days because I was given by friends, about 7 years to live. Um, the establishment, the HIV establishment, only gives you, 8 to 10 years to live. So, but anyways, we fast forward. I moved back to the original town that I was tested positive in, and I was in a relationship with a guy there for 3.5 years. Everything was great, and he was allegedly negative. I had sent him to the clinic a few times where he did the oral swab test, and so he was always negative. And um, we split up in 2003. It was somewhere around the summer of 2003, and I was thinking about moving again and getting away from the heartache and the breakup and everything. So I moved to Clearwater, Florida, and which is Pinellas County. It's sets on in the middle of, well, it's got like the body of waters on both sides of the county. So it takes about 30 to 40 minutes from the interstate to drive in, and so you're like inland, really inland in Pinellas County. And there it was different because everything's so sporadic and confusing. Um, most patients that see an HIV specialist, they they do everything like right in one clinic or one building. In Pinellas County, you can find yourself driving in Clearwater, Largo, St. Pete for all your services. So you're on a field trip for the day when you have an appointment, and it's just crazy. Well, I had moved there and transferred my job and was setting up a new apartment, was doing some painting and just getting the apartment ready. And I'd also changed my phone number after I had did my initial visit or my initial intake to Pinellas. And so they had um, did all my credentials and my blood work and everything. And so one day I'm painting the apartment and I pick up the phone and I called the clinic and the one clinic where I did my doctors, my blood work, um, and I told them that I'd changed my number and I had just moved there, and she said, well, we're looking for you, and there's some discrepancies in your lab work. So I went back and thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna die. I'm dying of AIDS, and it's over. I might as well just stop painting the apartment and go dig my grave. So I go back in, and as soon as I walked in, she, before I could even sit down, she set the document down on the table, and she says, "You're indeterminate. We think you're negative. You've got to consent to a new form to retest for HIV." And I said, "Well, that doesn't make any sense because you're asking me to retest for something that you've already told me that I have." And so I I kept questioning, and I was bothered by this because if we back up about, I would say, 6 to 8 months before I moved, um, when I was with my partner, I had stumbled across a website that um, I thought was just plain crazy, just quack. And the website was virusmyth.com, and I don't know how I stumbled on it, but I remember reading it, and I even showed my partner at the time, even though we were having problems, I even showed it to him. I said, "Look at this website. They're saying that HIV doesn't cause AIDS," and it was only for about 5 minutes, and then I shut it off and dismissed it as a crazy bunch of people. Well, at this point, when this lady had told me that I was negative and that she wasn't, well, you're negative, but we need to retest you to make sure that you're negative, blah, blah, blah. It just didn't make any sense to me because it's like, it's either a yes or a no. Either you are or you're not. And um, I began getting angry. And so I left. I consented to the form and I left with a million questions. And I called my mother and told her. And so I went back home, and my mom was always she was always dissenting things in the medical field, and she hated dentists and whatnot. So I I called her, and she had always told me, she's like, there's nothing wrong with you. You've never been sick. They gave you this awful diagnosis of something that doesn't make any sense with you. You're my son, and I love you, and you wouldn't listen to me. And I said, I know, Mom, I know. And so I go home and I get in front of the computer and I started doing research. I went to the World Health Organization, the National Institute of Health, and the CDC's website, and I started looking for this particular thing about indeterminate tests. And the information that I found was like a double standard. It didn't make any sense to me because on the CDC's website at that time in 2003, or actually it was 2004, it was that appointment had happened on January 2nd, 2004. Um, the CDC's website said that a patient with an indeterminate test result who is homosexual was considered HIV positive according to the CDC criteria. The next paragraph underneath said patient serum or patient's blood samples having an indeterminate um, test result who are heterosexual was considered negative. And so I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. What is being gay versus being straight? Because, you know, gay and straight people are human beings. We get the same kinds of illnesses and viruses all the time. So why would this matter, on the HIV issue? So I So I started looking, digging deeper, and started my research. And I even contacted a lawyer who claimed, made a ridiculous claim that the ARVs had cured me, and which I was just like, okay, I'm not even going to deal with this person. So, anyways, so we're up to 2004, and I, um, I remember when I got home that day, I quit taking the drugs. The was it the Combivir and Viramune that I was put on in Fort Lauderdale, and so I took that for 6 years. I went home and I remember I picked the pills up and I threw them across the kitchen and I said, I never needed you. I never needed this. I don't understand this, because at that moment I remember when they did tell me that I was HIV positive. I remember I went home and I was alone. I had no one around, and I remember crawling up into a fetal position, a grown man, 27 years old, on the floor in a fetal position for about 5, 6 hours, just crying, thinking it was over. This was my death sentence, and you think all these things. It's like it's something psychological when they tell you this. I mean, you can get a diagnosis for cancer or anything else, and I don't know if I don't think it can be the same. I think this HIV and AIDS thing is some sort of um, tactic or thing against people in general to scare them, because it does. To put you on the floor for 6 hours crying like a child, it is some pretty serious shit. And I thought back to that at the moment I threw those pills, and I said I never needed you. Um, I didn't manifest any of the, the common manifestations of taking these ARV drugs, these toxic antiretroviral drugs. A lot of the friends that I had, you know, um, that were taking drugs, they were looking old, and they were having fat deposits from their face and having surgery because they would have fuller skin. You can see that line that goes through the face, and they were just, these were young guys, and they were looking, 10 to 15 years older, because these drugs were you know, storing fat and fat deposits, and um, many other things too. I mean, they were having so many problems. I mean, and they're just aging. Um, I didn't. I was lucky enough. I was one of those people that didn't that I built up a resistance or an immunity to these toxic drugs, where I didn't manifest those, but I knew inside my organs were hurting. I mean, it was like a pain inside, your liver and your spleen and your kidneys, and all of those things were just, they were aching, they were hurting, I could tell. So I knew I was being hurt on the inside, but I followed this belief that if I didn't take them, that I would die. Since that part of my life, I've learned, I've done my research. We challenge the scientific validation of HIV test kits. Dr. Luc Montagnier and Robert Gallo, one was a co-discoverer and one was a Nobel laureate for the discovery of HIV. Uh, Neither of them, nor any scientist today, has taken HIV test kits, validated them, or verified them against HTLV3 or LAV isolation. When people are testing antibody, RNA, or DNA positive, people need to realize that they don't have virus, that these are non-specific, because the tests haven't been verified against the gold standard, and the isolation of the virus, the actual virus itself. The definitions for AIDS. Uh, Currently, there are over a dozen definitions, diverse definitions, that are actually very clever. The CDC, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, created a syndrome. It was directed or derived from GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency, which was from 1980 to 1982. And they were blaming, the homosexual community for this new problem. And so in 1982, somewhere about 1982 to 1983, they changed the definition, or they changed the name GRID to AIDS. And this was so that AIDS could be funded, and it was a public relations thing to sell AIDS. They published it in Time magazine and New York Times and many of the publications around uh, around the United States, and then of course it went global. But there are over 12 or more definitions for what constitutes an AIDS diagnosis. You could be in the United States and have a T cell count um, at a certain level and be told that you have AIDS, but then you can be in Africa and you don't even have to take an HIV test there, and you can be told you have AIDS. You can also have like tuberculosis or drink some, parasitic infested water and develop symptoms from that and be told that you have AIDS because of those symptoms are manifested, and that's one of the definitions for AIDS in Africa. Many gay people who you know they sniffed poppers in the early 80s and 90s. It was sold under VCR head cleaner and Rush and different things. Poppers, it destroys the lungs. It messes with the lungs and can cause you to manifest these KS lesions. And so in the United States, if you have KS, you don't even have to take an HIV test. They'll diagnose you with what they call AIDS in the United States. If you go to the FDA literature on any specific drug for an antiretroviral drug, you can find all of the studies and the warnings. They're black box warnings. What a black box drug is basically it's a black box. It's a black border around a warning telling you that it's basically you could die or it's life threatening. It can kill you because people have, according to their studies, anything from instant hepatitis, instant old age, depletes bone marrow and destroys DNA synthesis and um, nervous system damage, liver damage, kidney damage, skin damage, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, where it's a disease where your skin melts from the inside out, your mucosal layers and your dermal layers just literally fry from taking that drug, and also hypersensitivity to the sunlight. Your skin would burn from the sun because you're on this drug. You feel like a vampire. You have to wear glasses because it's so bright. We believe that the HIV test kits, the definitions for AIDS, um, and the toxic antiretroviral drugs have major gaping holes into what we've been told. And as far as the virus, HIV, there's a group of Australians that work for the Royal Perth Hospital in Perth, Australia, who challenge the original isolation protocol for HTLV3, which is Robert Gallo, and LAV, which is Luc Montagnier. They challenged his original isolation protocol. There's a website that has over 400,000 sequences of HIV. So what are these scientists calling HIV? Retroviruses are shown to be non-cytotoxic. So um, the does HIV exist or not? Um, I leave that up to the big guys, the bigger scientists that are debating this issue. And but we do know that HIV tests aren't looking for HIV. So either way, it causes more concern and more question. We were posies, we were people who believed that they were HIV positive. We were doctors and lawyers and scientists. We're from all around the world. We are rising up against this thing called HIV and AIDS, and we We demand answers. We want answers. We want to put a stop to this.